Hey all, hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking through what I read in January of 2025. I got through quite a few books. I am actually surprising my own self. I'm excited to share with you. It's been an interesting start to the year. So yeah, I'm just excited to share. If you're new to my channel, then know that my name is Shelly. I am very curious about books, reading, why I like what I like, why things don't work for me when they don't work, and just trying to maintain a healthy and flourishing reading life. So if you are new, I would encourage you to subscribe and stick around. Without any further rambling on, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. In rough order, I'm going to go from least favorite to most favorite. The first book I am going to talk through is one that I already made a whole video on. And what was interesting is that as I shared my thoughts in the video, you all shared your thoughts back. And that was really fun and helpful because as I am wondering and pondering and searching as to why something is not working for me, your comments help clarify how I felt about the book. And the book is John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. This is my second Steinbeck. I read The Red Pony and now Of Mice and Men. It is part of a classics project that I am working to complete. I chose a handful of books that were published around the 1930s and a couple of nonfiction books published more recently, but about authors who wrote in the 1930s. I will leave that video linked down below in case you're interested in my classics project. And so on this classics journey, I chose Of Mice and Men, and sadly, I didn't like it. And I don't know, I already feel as if Steinbeck is an author that is not for me. I don't think I really jive with his writing style. And there was so much in this book that troubled me, that I found issue with, that I felt like it was incredibly bleak. It was a very, very bleak book. And what you all came to tell me was saying that this book was written for those who were living through the Great Depression. And the Great Depression was a very difficult time in U.S. history. And it really did have that feeling of every man for himself, and you're dealing with rampant poverty. And so it was a very hopeless time. And so this is very much depicting that feeling, that time in history. And that really helped clarify for me why I struggled with this. I wasn't necessarily thinking about the time period in which it was written, so the bleakness makes more sense. However, overall, I think it was just a bit dark for me. I also read The Yearling by Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, which had some elements of this book here, Of Mice and Men, meaning that food was a scarcity for this family in The Yearling, and if they didn't harvest enough crops, then they would starve. Nobody had any extras. There wasn't a moment to spare, or there wasn't any, not a moment, but there wasn't a morsel to be spared. And so actually the comments in the Of Mice and Men video helped me better understand The Yearling, because again, I was reading it for its own sake. Outside of the context of which it was written, I wasn't really thinking about the Great Depression in the United States, which might be my own fault, but I also am thinking these are classics. They permeate time. They can be read by anyone at any point, and it should still resonate. And I think that knowing more about the context in which both of these books have been written, it is more clarifying to me to understand that food scarcity is or was a real problem and could lead to starvation or just absolute misery. And because of food scarcity, work scarcity, livelihood scarcity during this time in the US, finding friends was difficult. And so this book being about friendship during this time period, it really did mean more because of the period in which it was written. So it helped me clarify, but it didn't make me like the book anymore. I really didn't care for the book, ultimately, even though I can better understand the point of view of Steinbeck and where he was coming from when he wrote it. So in that classics project, I said I wanted to read The Grapes of Wrath, but now I really don't want to read The Grapes of Wrath. I really want to just go for the gusto, the big one, the magnum opus, the classic that Steinbeck wrote. And now I think I'm going to switch out The Grapes of Wrath in this reading project of mine for East of Eden. I'll hang on to The Grapes of Wrath, but I don't want to continue down this journey of Steinbeck and continue to not like his work while the big one, The Whale, the one that everybody loves, the one that everybody wants to conquer, the East of Eden book, while this is still on my to-be-read list. So I'd rather just get the big one out of the way, and if I like it, I might cycle back around to The Grapes of Wrath. But if I don't like it, then I'll know for sure that although so many of you love Steinbeck, which I love for you, that maybe Steinbeck isn't for me. The next 5 or so books have a theme: fun, escapist, and ultimately flawed. All of them have varying degrees of these 3 elements, and because of that, you know, some of them were really successful, and then some of them were less so. So the first on this list is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid. This is my second read. I read Foe a couple of years ago, and it made my best books of 2023, I believe. And what Foe is good at is that he's really good at creating a curious scenario that leaves the reader both unsettled and wondering what's going to happen next. And so with I'm Thinking of Ending Things, there is this really new boyfriend and girlfriend going to the boyfriend's house to meet his parents. Meanwhile, the girlfriend is wondering is thinking about ending the relationship. And through this trip, it is a trip. Things are very, very unsettling. It feels a little bit slippery, a little bit like you don't really know what's going on, or at least I didn't know what was going on, and that is very intentional by Reid. However, my big problem with this is that the way that it came together, the reveal, if you will, was to me the equivalent of "and he woke up." Like, it was all a dream. And it's like, okay, it makes sense. It makes sense that you ended it this way. Ending things, and he ended the book this way. It makes sense that you did it this way, but it feels like a cop-out. So because I can appreciate that I was so drawn in and that I was so curious and that I really wanted to know what was going to happen, but ultimately didn't feel very satisfied by the way that it all came together. And that's fair. So now I want to read Reid's We Spread, because that's the final book I think that he's written that I haven't read. And it's the most recent book that he read. This is Reid's debut. Then there was Foe, and now there's We Spread. And Foe was great. It all made sense. It didn't feel like a cop-out. It was fantastic, and I really enjoyed it. Gave me all of those same vibes of wanting to read, very curious, slightly unsettling. Loved it so much. And ultimately was, again, about, Foe was not just about, it was not just about the curiosity bits of it. It really was also about relationships and a marriage. It was so much deeper than what the inside flap would have told you. So now I want to read We Spread because I have hope that Reid has just gotten better at what he does, and that book will also be successful, and that this was just him testing out ideas to see what he can do and has learned from this misstep, in my opinion. The next book is doing a lot. It's doing a lot, both for the good of the book and for the detriment of the book. And it is Deanna Raybourn's Veronica Speedwell series, the first book in that series, which is called A Curious Beginning. In this, we have Veronica Speedwell, a butterfly extraordinaire, who in her life, in this moment in which we meet our main character, is free of all responsibilities, in a sense, because her last living family member has passed away, not under mysterious circumstances. However, shortly after the funeral of this family member, she is the victim of an attempted kidnapping, and there is a mysterious murder that seems to be connected to her in some way. So she is thrown together with a man named Stoker. This is all set in the Victorian time period, which is a really fun time period for me to be in, because I have read a handful of books from that time period and know enough about it to enjoy what an author is doing in that particular time. And so we have all these elements together. The plot is fun, and you definitely have this grumpy sunshine vibe. Stoker is the grump and Veronica Speedwell is the sunshine. Here's the deal though. Veronica herself is self-aware and assertive enough to make her quite obnoxious and also quite rude in a sense. It's like she knows herself so well that she stands up for herself, but often it comes off as insensitive and quite grating. And it's like, okay, so if you're this self-aware, wouldn't you also be self-aware enough that what you're saying is coming off quite rude? And there were times where her character is incongruous to Victorian time period in general, which I guess in some ways could be a breath of fresh air. You know, it feels modern, even though it's a historical mystery. But, you know, that kind of bothered me a little bit. But really, it was the personality of Veronica herself that at times I would just be like, I don't know, like, I wouldn't want to be friends with you. So I'm wondering this. I'm wondering if Deanna Raybourn will eventually tone down the vibe of Veronica Speedwell. If she'll make her a little more digestible as the series goes on. But we'll see. The book club that I'm in and myself, we're all trying to see how we get along with a couple of books before we meet back together again. And I'll have to see what the others have said. Otherwise, I don't know if I would continue the series myself. I might, but I'm also okay to just let it go. So we'll see. Next up on this fun, escapist, but ultimately flawed journey that we're on is the memoir of Kelly Bishop, who played Emily Gilmore in Gilmore Girls, and her memoir was entitled The Third Gilmore Girl. I picked this book up because I love Gilmore Girls. I'm watching every episode and talking about it on my channel right now. And there's something about that show that really speaks to me. It's my happy place, and I very much enjoy it. So I picked up the memoir, Kelly Bishop's memoir, with the wonder if I would learn a lot about the behind the scenes of Gilmore Girls with this particular book. And it was really light on the Gilmore Girls front. So I do think it's a me thing. I think that Kelly Bishop led a wonderful, joyful, successful, yet flawed life. I think that she's really good at being reflective of the choices that she made and why she made them. And there was a lot of love in the book and a lot of looking back on her career with satisfaction and with gratitude. And so all of those elements of the book didn't make the book a bad read, but there was pretty much the entire book, except for the small bits about Gilmore Girls, that I was learning about Kelly Bishop, and I didn't care much about it. Because I guess I'm not such a Kelly Bishop fan that her story was incredibly appealing to me. And it didn't have the Trevor Noah effect. The Trevor Noah effect is, even though Trevor Noah is a celebrity, he wrote a banging memoir that it didn't matter. It really didn't matter if you knew about Trevor Noah or I, because I wouldn't know Trevor. If he was walking down the road, I may stop him and be like, you look exactly like this celebrity Trevor Noah, without even realizing that it was the real person. That's exactly how I would interact with Trevor Noah. If I saw him walking down the road, I would mistake him for a doppelganger of himself. So having said that, when I read his memoir, it was so funny, it was so charming, and just what a wonderful storyteller he is, that it didn't really matter if I knew him or not. In this case, I feel like Emily Gilmore. I feel like Kelly Bishop was writing for her fans, and I'm a fan of Gilmore Girls. I'm not necessarily a fan of her. So it wasn't a boring memoir or anything. She kept you entertained, but it didn't have that magic, like the Trevor Noah magic that I would have ultimately wanted from a celebrity memoir. But again, I think it's a me thing. I think I was putting like way too high of expectations on the book, and they were skewed because I'm such a fan of the show. You know what I'm talking about. Next up, I read a whole series. I devoured this series, and it was Blake Crouch's Wayward Pines series. Wow. Okay, so I picked this up because I was on a kick from Iain Reid's book. I was on a kick of like unsettling, weird, odd books that I wanted to see what all the hype was about. And The Wayward Pines was something that appealed to me. I heard it was weird and unsettling, and ultimately, kind of got its grips into the reader's curiosity, that it made you want to keep reading, and it was absolutely escapist. So anyways, Blake Crouch's books fit that brief, which is what I was looking for. And Blake Crouch is someone that I've wanted to read from for a while. So the first book, and he even says this in his author's note, is very influenced by the very unsettling, scary show Twin Peaks. And the first book, especially the first half of the book, has that very, very creepy, skin crawly feel to it. It feels weird, and it was so much fun. And the second half of the book definitely turns into a thriller. Yes, like a thriller with a capital T. The main character seems somewhat invincible, somewhat unkillable, somewhat like, I don't know how this man is surviving through all of these death-threatening moments, and yet he still does. And then the book ends on this note, and that I was like, okay, I want to read the second book. So I read the second book. And in the second book, there were more answers. There's, the dynamic changes a little bit. But the thing that drew me in, the Twin Peaksy unsettling feeling of it all, that is totally gone by the second book. And I think as a reader, I was hoping for a certain outcome, and I was reading because I wanted the outcome, like you're invested, right? And so I was like, oh, yes. And it ends very satisfyingly. I was like, oh, it did it. It did it. You did it. And then I read the third book, and the third book felt like it was truly written for the fans. It was written for the fans of the series, that everybody wanted, it was written so that everything could be tied up and could have an ending that closed the chapter on this series. And that's what Blake Crouch decided to do, and I felt like the third book was the least successful. I think it could have easily been a duology, and it would have been fun and exciting, and left it with a little more of it would have been more open-ended, but still would have been quite satisfying. But the end, and I read this with my friend Fraser Simons, who has a channel here but hasn't posted in a while. Post if you want to post, Fraser. We would love to have you back. And we both agreed that like the first and second book were super fun and engaging, and then the third book, it felt a little like you are dropped in and the drama is super high, and the only place to go in this high stakes, high drama moment is to work towards an ending where all the little loose ends are tied up. And so that's, so then that's what happened, and it was kind of like, oh, okay, fine. However, I will say, if you're looking for fun, escapist, quick read that you just want to get like sucked in and forget about the world around you, these books, at least for me, did the did the trick. Like, they did the trick. I would have been satisfied if the brief of making this series like Twin Peaks, if he was able to maintain it throughout the whole series. But again, it's really the first half of the first book that he's able to do this with, which I think is, so it's kind of a fail in that way. Even though they were enjoyable, I don't know. To me, it's a bit of a fail. Again, I would have loved for it to just be like weird, super weird through to the very end. Now that I'm talking to y'all, if you have weird book recommendations, let me know. Like unsettling, but not too scary. I can't do too scary, but unsettling books, let me know. I like a good unsettling book. This final book had a lot to live up to, and it ended up being my favorite for the month. So it is a historical fiction book, which is my favorite genre to read, but can also go very sour if it's done poorly. It is set during World War II, and I've read a lot of World War II books, and I'm kind of cool on that time period. I'm good to space out my World War II books like very far apart. And it is, let's see, and it has a couple of perspectives, which I feel like could go really well, but sometimes can go really, really poorly, especially if one perspective is far more well written than another perspective. And so this book did all of it wonderfully, and it is The Mistress of the Ritz by Melanie Benjamin. This is about a couple, Claude and Blanche Azello. Claude is the manager of the very bougie, very high-end, high-scale, wonderful Ritz. And he's in that position as the Nazis begin to occupy France. And so you see the culture and the political climate of the town, of the hotel, change. And he is married to Blanche, who is now, living in France, obviously, but was an American, has very different ideas about marriage than poor Claude, who has very French ideals about marriage, and their ideals about marriage clash and cause a lot of issues. She's also, Blanche is the life of the party, loves to be among high society, is one who, she steps through the door and she lights up the room because of her personality. She says what she's thinking. She's unafraid to just be bold. And so she has all of these qualities, and so her husband is more of a servant leader. He's quiet. He takes great pride in his job of getting the guests exactly what they need. And so you have these very different personalities, and you get their backstory of what brought them together, and then you see the flaws in their marriage. The reader can really see the flaws in the things that they've done to each other, the way that they've broken each other's trust, the way that they've had moments where they have not been their best selves to each other or for each other. And then meanwhile, so that's kind of like, the beginning, their middle, and then you get this sort of like present moment where the Nazis are occupying France, and how this changes everything for them. So here's what's interesting is that it does this thing where there's all this world building, relationship building, character development that is at a simmer. It's at its own pace. It's interesting. But at times I was kind of like, okay, is this going anywhere? Will it end up, what is it doing? And then you get to this part in the book that's about 3/4 of the way in. The last 25% of the book, I flew through this book. I could not put it down. My heart was in my throat. I needed to know what was going to happen. It was like things were revealed, things happened that I had to know. I had to know what was going to go down. And it is perilous and traumatic and beautiful and wonderful. And it was so satisfying. And it's doing this thing that I call it like the Iliad effect. In that sometimes, like for the Iliad in particular, by Homer, you have 17 chapters of world building, character development, world building and character development, really, that's it. Plot development, and it's, oh my gosh, and it's slow. It's real slow. And then it's like the floor drops out from underneath the book, and you cannot stop. I don't Florida dropped underneath, but I don't know. That metaphor does not make sense. It is like the gunshot. A gun is shot in the air and you have to run. You have to run to the finish line or you will not make it. And Melanie Benjamin does that with this book. And so I remember with the Iliad, I struggled to start that book. Like I started it, I think 3 times, and I would get kind of stuck. And I'm like, is this worth it? Is this worth it? And then you get to book 17, chapter 7, well, it's book 17. And it is like the gunshot in the air. And I couldn't, it was so emotional. It was so wonderful. It was so amazing. And I tend to really like books like that. So this is doing the same thing. 3/4 of the book, it's going, it's interesting, it's kind of slow. Characters are being developed, and then the gun is shot in the air, and I could not stop. I could not put this down. I had to finish it that night, which is saying a lot, by the way, because I am somebody who prioritizes my sleep, and if I am tired, I will fall asleep. And with this, I just had to know. I had to know what was going to happen, and it was fantastic. Very satisfying, wonderful. Here's a tip, though. Don't look up the couple. They're a real couple. Don't look them up. Let the authors explain who they were in real life and her inspiration for these characters, because it will spoil kind of like the last 2 pages of the book, which, isn't the most, it's not the most, it's not the twist at the end that makes everything satisfying. No, but it will kind of, I think, sour your perception of these characters a little bit. So that's my tip from me to you. Let me know. What did you read? Give me the tea. What went down? Have you read any of these books? Let a girl know. I would love to know. Love talking books with y'all. Y'all shape my reading, shape my thoughts about what I read. I love it so much, and I'm so grateful for you all. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. And I'll see you all in my next one.